The stone beneath her knees had drunk too much blood tonight. Aveline scrubbed harder, her raw fingers wrapped around the coarse brush like a lifeline. The metallic scent clung to her nostrils. Thick, coppery, familiar. Pack meetings always left stains. What followed was the silent testimony of hierarchy written in crimson across ancient floors. Her ribs screamed with each movement. Yesterday's lesson from Beta Rowan still painted her torso in shades of purple and black. Yet she couldn't stop. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the sound Sarah had made before she disappeared. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, measured, commanding, inevitable. Alpha Corvin. Without warning, her entire body tensed. She pressed herself lower against the stone, making herself invisible. Through her lashes, she watched polished black boots halt 3 feet away. Her heart hammered against her damaged ribs. Report. His voice cut through the morning silence like a blade through silk. Territory patrols completed, Alpha. Beta Marcus's tone carried military precision. No incursions detected. However, the Omega quarters require additional discipline. Some have been speaking out of turn. The brush stilled in Aveline's hands, speaking out of turn, as if having a voice was a crime punishable by death, because it was. Handle it. 2 words that sealed fates. 2 words that meant more broken bones, more disappeared friends, more silence bought with blood and fear. The boots moved on, but their echo remained. Even so, something stirred deep in Aveline's chest. Not fear this time, but something far more dangerous. Rage.
The fortress felt like a tomb at dawn, all shadow and stone and the crushing weight of absolute authority pressing against Corvin's shoulders. He moved through his domain with mechanical precision, a man who'd forgotten what it meant to feel anything beyond duty. The Omega scrubbing at his feet didn't look up. Good training. Still, something about her careful stillness tugged at the edges of his consciousness. Report. Marcus delivered the morning briefing with familiar efficiency. Border patrols, pack hierarchy. Problems requiring swift, decisive solutions. When Marcus mentioned the Omega quarters, Corvin felt nothing but mild irritation. Disruption was inefficiency, and inefficiency weakened the pack. Handle it. He continued his rounds, yet somehow couldn't shake the image of small hands working methodically at bloodstains. The way she'd made herself smaller when he approached wasn't simple fear. It was something more practiced, more resigned. Despite that, what disturbed him most was the fleeting moment when golden eyes had met his. Just for an instant before darting away, he'd glimpsed something that looked almost like defiance. The thought followed him up the stone steps to his private chambers like a shadow he couldn't escape. More importantly, it made his wolf stir with interest for the first time in months. Omegas were pack resources, nothing more. He'd learned long ago that caring about individuals was a luxury an alpha couldn't afford. But as he settled behind his desk, those golden eyes haunted him still.
You missed a spot. Rowan's voice slithered through the kitchen like poisoned honey, soft, conversational, deadly. Aveline looked up from the hearth she'd been scrubbing to find him blocking the doorway, all broad shoulders and predatory grace. The other Omegas had vanished the moment his scent hit the air. They'd learned, as she had, that survival meant disappearing when Rowan wanted privacy for his lessons. Where? She kept her voice level, submissive. The wrong inflection could transform correction into catastrophe. Each step he took was deliberate, calculated. Here. His finger traced a line across her cheek that made her stomach clench with dread. Soot on your face. Sloppy work, Aveline. You know how I feel about sloppy work. The first blow came without warning, a backhand that snapped her head sideways. Stars exploded across her vision, but she bit back the cry, desperate to escape. Sound only encouraged him. An Omega's value lies in service, Rowan continued conversationally, as if he hadn't just rattled her teeth. When service proves poor, correction becomes necessary. You understand, don't you? Yes, Beta. The words tasted like ash and submission. His hand fisted in her hair, yanking her head back until her neck screamed in protest. I don't think you do. Some of the other Omegas have been chatty about things that aren't their concern. The kitchen walls seemed to close around them. This wasn't about soot or sloppy work. This was about silence, about fear, about ensuring she remembered her place in the pack hierarchy. When his fist connected with her ribs, something inside cracked. Not just bone, though she heard that too, but something deeper. Something that had been bending under years of systematic brutality until today it finally snapped, because pain had a limit, and she'd just found hers.
Perfect submission. That's what Rowan appreciated about Aveline. She'd learned her lessons well over the years. Unlike newer Omegas who still harbored foolish hope, still required regular reminders of their place. But lately, whispers had begun, hushed conversations that died when he entered rooms, glances exchanged between lower ranks that spoke of dangerous ideas taking root. It was cancer that needed cutting out before it spread. An Omega's value lies in service. He let authority weight each word, the kind that brooked no argument. When he struck her, satisfaction bloomed in his chest. Order restored through strength. This was pack law. Her hair felt like silk between his fingers as he forced her to meet his eyes. Good. Let her see the consequences of stepping out of line. Let her remember who held the power here. Some of the other Omegas have been chatty. Fear in those golden eyes was exactly what he wanted to see. Fear meant compliance. Fear meant she wouldn't spread dangerous ideas about speaking up or fighting back. Fear kept the natural order intact. When his fist met her ribs, he felt bone give way and smiled. The choked-off whimper she made was music, proof the lesson was taking hold. Yet something in her expression shifted as she crumpled to the floor. Not the broken acceptance he expected. Something else. Something that looked disturbingly like resolve. The thought was dismissed as quickly as it came. Omegas didn't possess resolve. They had survival instincts, nothing more. But as he left her bleeding on the kitchen stones, unease prickled at the back of his mind.
3 days. 3 days since Rowan's latest lesson, and Aveline could barely draw breath without her ribs screaming protest. She'd hidden the worst damage, as always. Omega healing was slow, and visible injuries raised questions she couldn't afford to answer. But something fundamental had changed that day in the kitchen. The snap she'd felt wasn't breaking. It was breaking free. From her hiding spot in the servants' corridors, she'd spent hours watching the pack's daily rhythms, seeing patterns invisible before. Alpha Corvin held formal audiences every 7th day. Pack law guaranteed any member could request a hearing, even Omegas. Her fingers traced the formal request she'd written in careful script, hidden beneath her sleeping furs for 2 days while courage slowly gathered. The words seemed to burn against her palm. Omega Aveline Thorne requests formal audience with Alpha Corvin regarding violations of pack law. Pack law, as if someone like her possessed the right to invoke such sacred words. But Mira was dead. Elena had vanished in the night. Sarah barely spoke anymore, her spirit crushed under systematic brutality. How many more would break before someone found courage to speak? The receiving chamber lay ahead, its great doors standing open for morning petitions. Through the archway, she could see Alpha Corvin in his carved stone chair, listening to a border dispute with that cold attention he gave everything. He looked carved from winter itself, beautiful, remote, utterly untouchable. Her heart hammered against damaged ribs as she stepped forward. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to accept her place as she always had. Before she could move, the voices of the broken and disappeared whispered louder. One chance. One moment to speak truth to power, even if it killed her. Truth be told, she was already dying by inches anyway.
Morning petitions dragged through their usual tedium. Border disputes, resource allocation, minor infractions requiring the Alpha's arbitration. Corvin handled each with mechanical efficiency, his mind already shifting to more pressing concerns. Then movement in the doorway caught his attention. An Omega approached the receiving chamber with careful, measured steps. Unusual. Lower ranks typically sent representatives rather than appearing themselves. As she drew closer, recognition flickered. The cleaning girl from the corridors, the one with two careful movements and downcast eyes. But her eyes weren't downcast now. They were fixed on him with intensity that was surprising. She carried herself differently too, spine straight despite obvious pain. Purpose drove her approach, speaking of desperate courage rather than routine submission. She stopped at the prescribed distance and offered the proper bow, but when she straightened, those golden eyes met his directly. Bold, unprecedented, potentially dangerous, depending on what brought her here. Alpha. Her voice carried clearly across the chamber, steady despite the tremor he detected beneath. I request formal audience to report violations of pack law. The words hit the room like physical force. Conversation stopped. Every eye turned to the small Omega who just invoked one of their most sacred traditions. Pack law. From an Omega. Either she was dangerously naive or she possessed information worth hearing. His wolf stirred with genuine curiosity for the first time in months as he studied her. Something about her careful composure, the way she held herself together through obvious pain, spoke of strength that had nothing to do with rank or physical power. Approach, he commanded. Whatever this was about, it was going to be interesting. As she moved forward without hesitation, Corvin found himself leaning slightly forward in his chair, the first spontaneous movement he'd made during audiences in years.
The great hall stretched before her like a cathedral of judgment, ancient stone columns rising into shadow, pack banners hanging like silent witnesses. Each step toward the Alpha's throne echoed with finality. Alpha Corvin sat carved from winter itself, steel-gray eyes tracking her approach with predatory focus. The assembled pack members fell silent, their combined stares pressing against her skin like physical weight. Speak, he commanded, his voice cutting through the silence. Aveline's throat felt raw, but the words came anyway, steady, clear, unstoppable. Beta Rowan has violated pack law through systematic abuse of Omegas under his authority. The hall erupted. Gasps, snarls. The scrape of chairs as pack members rose in shock. Through it all, she kept her eyes locked on the Alpha's face, watching something flicker behind that mask of control. Lies! Rowan's voice boomed across the chamber as he stepped forward, his face twisted with righteous fury. This Omega seeks attention through false accusations. I demand punishment for her slander. But Alpha Corvin wasn't looking at Rowan. His gaze remained fixed on Aveline with laser intensity, taking in details she'd tried so hard to hide. The careful way she held her left side, the faded bruises along her throat, the tremor in her hands that had nothing to do with fear. Show me, he said quietly. The words hit her like a physical blow. Show him. Expose herself before the entire pack. Strip away the careful layers of concealment she'd built over years of survival. Without warning, her hands moved to the collar of her rough-spun dress. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled the fabric aside to reveal the canvas of brutality painted across her skin. Purple bruises, yellowing marks, the distinctive pattern of knuckles against ribs. A sound escaped the Alpha's throat, something between a growl and a roar that made every wolf in the room freeze. His eyes blazed with sudden fire, and for one terrifying moment, Aveline thought she'd pushed too far. Then she realized the fury wasn't directed at her. Beta Rowan. The Alpha's voice had gone deadly soft. Explain.
The moment she pulled back her dress, Corvin's world tilted sideways. He'd seen battle wounds, torture marks, the aftermath of pack challenges gone wrong. But this systematic canvas of brutality painted across fragile skin, ignited something primal deep in his chest. His wolf surged forward with protective fury so intense it stole his breath. Mine, it snarled. Protect, destroy, threat. The reaction shocked him. He hadn't felt this level of emotion in years, hadn't allowed himself to care enough about anything to feel this white-hot rage burning through his veins. Beta Rowan. His voice came out deadly soft, each word precisely controlled despite the storm raging inside. Explain. Rowan stepped forward with practiced confidence, but Corvin caught the slight tremor in his hands, the way his scent carried undertones of fear beneath the bluster. Alpha, this Omega has clearly injured herself to gain sympathy. She's unstable. Enough. The single word cracked like a whip across the hall. Corvin rose from his throne, and every pack member instinctively stepped back. You will submit to questioning, now. As he moved down the steps toward where Aveline stood, still exposed, still trembling with courage that humbled him, Corvin caught her scent properly for the first time. Beneath the fear and pain lay something else, something that made his wolf pace restlessly, demanding closer contact. She'd done the impossible. This small broken Omega had walked into his hall and forced him to feel again, forced him to see the rot festering in his own pack while he'd been locked away in emotional ice. The consequences would be severe. For Rowan, for the pack structure, for himself. But as he looked into those golden eyes, defiant, terrified, hopeful, Corvin realized he didn't care. Some things were worth burning the world down for.
The Alpha's private chambers felt like entering a wolf's den. All dark wood and stone, heavy tapestries blocking out the afternoon sun. Aveline perched on the edge of a leather chair, hyper-aware of every breath, every heartbeat echoing in the sudden quiet. Alpha Corvin paced behind his massive desk like a caged predator, the controlled fury from the great hall still radiating from his powerful frame. When he finally stopped and pinned her with that steel-gray stare, her mouth went dry. "Tell me everything," he commanded, his voice rough with barely leashed emotion. So she did. The words poured out like water through a broken dam. Years of systematic abuse, missing Omegas, the culture of fear Rowan had cultivated in the shadows. With each detail, she watched the Alpha's expression grow darker, more dangerous. "How long?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "Since I was 16. The admission felt like ripping open old wounds. It started small. Corrections for imagined infractions. Then, she couldn't finish. Didn't need to. The evidence was written across her skin for anyone with eyes to see. Something shifted in the air between them, a charge that made her wolf stir restlessly. The Alpha moved closer, and she caught his scent. Pine forests and winter storms, power and protection wrapped in masculine heat. "You're safe now," he said, and the words carried the weight of absolute promise. "I give you my word." Aveline's breath hitched. When was the last time anyone had offered her safety? When was the last time she'd dared to hope for it? "Alpha?" "Corvin." The correction came swift, surprising. "In private, you may call me Corvin." The intimacy of his given name on her tongue sent warmth spiraling through her chest. This was dangerous territory, and Omega didn't address an Alpha so casually. Yet he'd given permission, created space for something beyond pack hierarchy. "There's more," she whispered, gathering courage. "Other Omegas who've tried to speak up. They disappeared." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Names." As she recited the list of the lost and silenced, Aveline watched something fundamental shift in Corvin's expression. The cold, detached Alpha was disappearing, replaced by a man awakening to the horror that had flourished under his rule. And despite every instinct screaming warnings about trusting power, she found herself believing in the protection he offered.
Each name she spoke hit Corvin like a physical blow. Sarah, Mira, Elena. Faces flickered through his memory, Omegas who'd simply vanished from pack life, their disappearances explained away as runaways or voluntary departures. How had he been so blind? The answer sat before him in golden eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. He'd been locked away in emotional ice, ruling through distance and detachment while corruption festered in his own pack. "You're safe now." The words came from someplace deep inside, carrying the full weight of his alpha authority. "I give you my word." He watched her reaction, the way hope flickered across her features before caution reasserted itself. Smart. She'd learned not to trust easily. That wisdom had probably kept her alive. Corvin. The sound of his name from her lips sent an unexpected jolt through his system. When was the last time someone had used his given name? When was the last time he'd wanted them to? As she continued her testimony, Corvin found himself studying details beyond the horror she described. The way late afternoon light caught golden highlights in her brown hair, the delicate line of her throat when she swallowed nervously, the fierce intelligence blazing behind those expressive eyes. His wolf was circling, intrigued by something beyond protective instinct. She'd shown incredible courage coming to him, had risked everything to speak truth to power. That kind of strength wrapped in such apparent fragility called to something primal in his nature, dangerous thoughts. She was under his protection now, vulnerable and traumatized. The last thing she needed was her alpha developing inappropriate interest. But as she finished recounting the litany of Rowan's crimes, something fundamental had shifted between them. The careful distance he maintained from all pack members had cracked, letting in possibility he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. She was going to be trouble. The best kind of trouble.
The pack meeting that evening crackled with tension thick enough to taste. Aveline sat in the front row, unprecedented placement for an Omega, feeling the weight of hostile stares burning into her back. Beside her, Alpha Corvin radiated controlled fury that made her wolf press close to the surface. "Beta Rowan stands accused of violating pack law," Corvin announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the Great Hall. "The evidence is substantial. His authority is hereby suspended pending full investigation." Rowan surged to his feet, face twisted with rage. "You would take the word of a lying Omega over your own Beta? She's manipulating you, Alpha. Can't you see?" "What I see," Corvin's voice dropped to a growl that silenced the room, "is a pattern of systematic abuse that ends now." But the damage was spreading. Aveline could feel the pack fracturing around them, some nodding approval at long-overdue justice, others muttering about disrupted hierarchy and dangerous precedents. The divide was forming, and she sat at the epicenter like the eye of a brewing storm. That's when Rowan played his final card. "Brothers!" He turned to address the pack directly, bypassing Corvin's authority. "Look what this Omega has brought us. Division, chaos. She seeks to tear apart everything our ancestors built." His voice rose to a roar. "I call for her immediate exile before she destroys us all." Several pack members rose in support, their howls of agreement echoing off stone walls. But others remained seated, uncertainty flickering across their faces. The hall erupted into chaos, shouting, snarling, the scrape of chairs as wolves took sides. In the center of it all, Aveline felt herself shrinking back into old patterns of making herself small and invisible. Then Corvin's hand closed over hers. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm, but more than that, it anchored her, reminded her that she wasn't alone in this anymore. When she looked up into his steel-gray eyes, she saw something that stole her breath. Not just protection, not just alpha authority, possession, pure and simple. "Anyone who touches her," Corvin's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, "answers to me." The pack fell silent. In that silence, something fundamental shifted. Lines had been drawn, sides chosen, and at the center of it all, an Omega and an Alpha stared at each other with dawning recognition of what was building between them, dangerous, forbidden, and absolutely inevitable.
The moment Rowan called for Aveline's exile, Corvin's control snapped. His wolf surged forward with murderous intent, demanding blood, demanding justice for the attempt to harm what was theirs. The primitive response shocked him with its intensity. He hadn't felt this level of protective fury even for his previous mate. The thought hit him like cold water. He'd loved Lydia with the devoted affection of a younger man, But this was different, rawer, more consuming. When his hand closed over Aveline's, the contact sent fire racing through his veins. She was trembling, not with fear, but with the effort of holding herself together in the face of pack hostility. Her courage humbled him. "Anyone who touches her answers to me." The words came from someplace primal, carrying the full weight of alpha command. He felt the pack's shock ripple through the room like a physical force. He'd just publicly claimed protection over an Omega in a way that went far beyond typical alpha duty. The implications would be discussed in every den and gathering place before dawn. Some would see it as weakness, an alpha swayed by a pretty face and sob story. Others would recognize it for what it truly was, the beginning of a bond that would either strengthen the pack or tear it apart. As he stared down into Aveline's golden eyes, seeing the mix of gratitude, fear, and something deeper burning there, Corvin realized he didn't care about the consequences. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. Let them whisper. Let them plot. Let them choose sides. She was under his protection now, and he was discovering that some things were worth fighting the entire world for. The war for his pack's soul had just begun, and she was both the cause and the prize. But as her fingers tightened around his, Corvin found himself hoping she might choose to fight beside him rather than simply be protected by him. That hope was going to change everything.
The Alpha's wing felt like stepping into another world, one where Omegas weren't meant to tread. Thick carpets muffled her footsteps, and tapestries depicting ancient pack victories lined walls that had never known her blood. Yet here she stood, in chambers reserved for the pack's most honored because Alpha Corvin had declared her under his personal protection. "These will be your quarters," he said, gesturing toward a room larger than the entire Omega dormitory. Sunlight streamed through actual windows, not the narrow slits she was accustomed to, but wide panes of glass that revealed the forest beyond. Aveline's breath caught. "Alpha, I can't. This is too much." "You can, and you will." His voice carried gentle finality. "You've lived in shadows long enough." Still, old habits died hard. She found herself backing toward the doorway, overwhelmed by space and light and the impossible reality of safety. This couldn't last. Nothing good ever did. As if sensing her retreat, Corvin stepped closer. Aveline. Her name on his lips made her shiver. "You're safe here. I meant what I said in the hall." The warmth in his voice wrapped around her like a protective embrace. When was the last time someone had spoken her name with such care? When was the last time she'd been offered choices instead of commands? "The other Omegas," she whispered. "They'll need protection too. Rowan's supporters won't just disappear because you suspended him." Something shifted in Corvin's expression, approval mixed with something deeper. "Already arranged. Guards have been assigned to the Omega quarters. And you—" He hesitated, as if the next words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. "You won't be returning there." The implications hit her like a physical blow. He wasn't just offering temporary sanctuary. This was permanent relocation. Elevation beyond anything she'd dared imagine. Yet beneath gratitude, unease stirred. What did an Alpha expect in return for such unprecedented protection? What price would she eventually be asked to pay? As if reading her thoughts, Corvin's expression softened. "No strings, no expectations beyond healing and finding your voice again. You've been silenced long enough." But even as relief flooded through her, Aveline couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stepped onto a precipice. Safety came with its own dangers, especially when it arrived wrapped in steel-gray eyes and a voice that made her wolf purr with recognition.
Watching Aveline explore her new quarters was like watching a caged bird discover the sky. Every gesture spoke of careful disbelief, as if she expected the safety to be snatched away at any moment. The Omega dormitory. Christ, he'd never even seen the conditions his pack's most vulnerable members endured. That ignorance sat like acid in his stomach, another failing to add to a growing list. The other Omegas, she said, and of course her first thought was for others' welfare rather than her own comfort. The selflessness in her voice made his chest tight with unnamed emotion. They'll need protection too. Already arranged. He'd spent the afternoon implementing safeguards that should have existed from day one. But watching relief bloom across her delicate features, he realized the true scope of the problem he'd inherited through willful blindness. You won't be returning there. The words carried more weight than simple protection protocols. He was claiming her, in a way that went beyond alpha authority into territory that made his wolf pace with satisfaction. Dangerous territory, given her vulnerability and his position. Her uncertainty was palpable, the way she held herself ready for disappointment for the other shoe to drop. Someone had taught her that safety was temporary, that protection came with prices too steep to pay. No strings, no expectations beyond healing and finding your voice again. Truth, but not the whole truth. Because standing here in the golden afternoon light, watching her tentatively explore this new reality, Corvin was discovering expectations he hadn't known he possessed. The way she moved drew his gaze. The sound of his name from her lips made him want to hear it again, whispered in different circumstances. She was under his protection, traumatized, vulnerable. The last thing she needed was her alpha developing feelings that complicated an already complex situation. But as she turned to face him fully, sunlight catching gold highlights in her hair, Corvin acknowledged the truth he'd been avoiding. Too late. The feelings were already there, growing stronger with every brave word she spoke, every grateful glance she sent his way. He was in trouble. The best kind of trouble.
The training grounds sprawled behind the main fortress like a warrior's playground, packed earth worn smooth by generations of wolves learning to fight, to hunt, to survive. Aveline had never set foot here before. Omegas weren't trained for combat, until now. Basic defensive positions, Corvin said, his voice taking on the crisp authority of an instructor. Start here. He demonstrated the stance, feet spread for balance, hands raised to protect vital areas. When Aveline tried to mirror his position, her damaged ribs screamed protest. The sound that escaped her throat was barely audible, but Corvin caught it anyway. Too much? His question carried gentle concern that made her heart skip. No. The word came out fiercer than intended. I need this. Because she did. Every instinct that had kept her alive through years of abuse was demanding she learn to defend herself. Never again would she be helpless, cowering while someone else decided her fate. Corvin studied her with those penetrating steel-gray eyes before nodding. Again, slower this time. The lesson continued with careful patience. He adjusted her stance with gentle touches that sent electricity racing across her skin, his hands on her shoulders repositioning her guard, his voice in her ear explaining leverage and angles of attack. An Omega's size can be an advantage, he murmured, close enough that his breath stirred her hair. Faster, more agile, harder to catch. The proximity was intoxicating. She could smell him, pine forests and winter storms, power and protection wrapped in masculine heat. Could feel the careful restraint in every touch, the way he maintained professional distance despite the charge building between them. Like this? She attempted the defensive maneuver he'd shown her, and this time managed it without triggering her injuries. Perfect. The approval in his voice made warmth bloom in her chest. You're a natural. Natural. As if she'd been born for this instead of taught from childhood that her only value lay in submission and service. The idea was intoxicating, revolutionary. When their eyes met across the small space between them, something shifted. The air grew thick with possibility, with recognition of the attraction neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Then reality crashed back. She was damaged goods, an Omega with a history of abuse, learning to defend herself from the alpha who'd saved her. The gulf between them was unbridgeable. but the way he looked at her suggested maybe bridges could be built from stranger materials than social conventions.
Teaching Aveline to fight was the sweetest torture Corvin had ever endured. Every adjustment of her stance required touching her, hands on shoulders, fingers repositioning her guard, the brush of his palm against her spine as he corrected her posture. Each contact sent fire racing through his veins while his wolf purred with satisfaction at the proximity. An omega's size can be an advantage. The words came out rougher than intended as he leaned close to demonstrate a defensive move. She smelled like sunshine and courage, with undertones that made his control fray at the edges. This was dangerous territory. She was under his protection, still healing from systematic abuse, learning to trust again. The last thing she needed was her alpha developing inappropriate interest. But Christ, she was magnificent. The fierce determination in her golden eyes as she mastered each technique. The way she pushed through obvious pain to continue training. The growing confidence that transformed her from cowering victim to someone who could stand her ground. Perfect. The word slipped out loaded with more meaning than simple approval. Because she was perfect, not despite her scars, but because of how she'd survived them, how she was choosing to grow stronger rather than stay broken. When their eyes met, the attraction crackling between them was impossible to ignore. He saw the exact moment she felt it too, the way her breath caught, the flush that spread across her cheeks, the flutter of her pulse at the base of her throat. Then uncertainty crashed across her features, and he knew she was remembering the vast gulf between their positions. Alpha and Omega, protector and protected, the power imbalance that made any relationship between them complicated at best. But standing here in the afternoon sunlight, watching her discover her own strength, Corvin found himself caring less about complications and more about possibility. She was going to be trouble, the absolute best kind of trouble. And he was rapidly running out of reasons to resist falling completely under her spell. The training session was far from over, but something fundamental had shifted between them. Lines were blurring, walls were cracking, and neither of them seemed inclined to rebuild them.
The attack came at twilight, when shadows stretched long across the fortress grounds and most of the pack had gathered for evening meal. Aveline was returning from her daily walk, a luxury she still couldn't quite believe was hers, when movement in the tree line caught her attention. 3 wolves emerged from the forest with predatory grace, their eyes reflecting menace in the dying light. Not pack members. The territorial scents were all wrong, and the way they moved spoke of hostile intent. Silverclaw pack. The markings were subtle but unmistakable to anyone who'd learned to read danger in every shadow. Her first instinct was to run, to hide, to make herself invisible as she'd perfected over years of survival. But something deeper override that impulse, the memory of Corvin's voice during training, steady and sure. "You're stronger than you know." Instead of fleeing, she backed slowly toward the fortress, keeping the intruders in sight while reaching for the emergency horn every pack member carried. The sound that tore from the curved instrument was sharp, urgent, unmistakable. The lead wolf snarled and lunged. What followed was pure instinct. Training took over as Aveline dropped into the defensive stance Corvin had drilled into her, letting the attacker's momentum carry him past while she twisted away from snapping jaws. Not graceful, not pretty, but effective. The second wolf circled, looking for an opening, while the third hung back as if waiting for something, or someone. "Well, well." The voice came from the shadows, smooth and mocking. "The little Omega who thinks she's something special." Rowan stepped into view and everything clicked into place. This wasn't random violence. This was orchestrated revenge, designed to look like enemy pack aggression while eliminating the witness who'd brought him down. "Did you really think your precious alpha could protect you forever?" Rowan's smile was all teeth and malice. Accidents happen, even in the safest places. But before he could signal his hired killers, the sound of pounding footsteps echoed across the grounds. Corvin appeared at the fortress entrance like an avenging angel, his face twisted with fury that made the air itself seem to vibrate with danger. The Silverclaw wolves took one look at the enraged Alpha bearing down on them and fled into the forest. Rowan melted back into shadows with practiced ease, leaving no evidence of his involvement. Yet as Corvin reached her, pulling her against his chest with desperate relief, Aveline felt something settle into place. She'd faced danger and survived. Had defended herself instead of simply enduring. The scared Omega was disappearing, replaced by someone stronger. Someone worth fighting for.
The sound of the emergency horn cut through evening air like a blade through silk, sending ice straight into Corvin's veins. That was Aveline's signal. He'd given each protected pack member a unique tone, and he knew hers as well as his own heartbeat. What he found when he reached the source made his wolf howl with murderous rage. 3 Silverclaw wolves circling her like sharks, while she stood in perfect defensive position, golden eyes blazing with determination instead of fear. No cowering, no pleading, just fierce readiness to fight for her life. Pride swelled in his chest, even as fury at the threat consumed him. She'd listened, had learned, had chosen to stand her ground instead of breaking under pressure. The attackers fled at his approach, smart of them considering the violence raging through his system at the sight of anyone threatening what was his. And she was his, he realized with startling clarity, not as property or conquest, but as something infinitely more precious. "Are you hurt?" His hands moved over her automatically, checking for injuries while his wolf demanded closer contact, demanded to scent mark her as protected, as claimed. "I'm fine." Her voice carried steady strength that made his chest tight with unnamed emotion. "They didn't touch me." But this had been orchestrated. The timing, the location, the way they'd targeted her specifically. This wasn't random pack aggression. Someone had wanted her dead, and Corvin had a very good idea who. Rowan, still lurking in the shadows, still pulling strings, still trying to silence the voice that had brought his crimes to light. As he held Aveline against his chest, feeling her heart race against his ribs, Corvin made a silent promise. The game's ended now. The threats stopped here, because she'd just proven something he'd suspected from the moment she'd walked into his hall. Beneath that delicate exterior beat the heart of a warrior. Someone worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth everything. The war for his pack's soul was escalating, but so was his determination to win it. With her beside him, failure wasn't an option. She was his strength, his motivation, his reason to become the alpha his pack truly needed. And he was rapidly running out of patience with anyone who threatened her.
The great hall buzzed with tension thick enough to cut. Pack members filled every available space, their whispered conversations dying as Alpha Corvin took his place at the carved stone throne. Aveline sat in the front row, her usual spot now, though it still felt surreal, watching him command the room with nothing more than his presence. "The attack on our territory 3 nights ago was not random," Corvin announced, his voice carrying to every corner. "Silverclaw wolves, guided by a traitor within our own ranks." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Eyes darted toward empty spaces where Rowan's supporters usually sat. The beta himself had vanished after the failed assassination attempt, but his influence lingered like poison in water. "Therefore," Corvin continued, steel entering his tone, "I am implementing new security measures, and—" His gaze found hers across the crowded hall, something burning in those gray depths that made her breath catch. "I am announcing my intention to take a mate." The hall erupted. Gasps of shock, excited whispers about potential alliances, speculation about which noble Omega or visiting Alpha's daughter had caught their leader's attention. But Corvin's eyes never left hers. "Aveline Thorne," he said, and the hall fell silent as death. "If you will have me." The world tilted sideways. Every face in the room turned toward her with expressions ranging from shock to outrage to calculating interest. An Omega, a nobody, the broken girl who dared speak truth to power. He was choosing her. "Alpha," she whispered, forgetting protocol, forgetting everything except the impossibility of what he was offering. Think about it, he said gently, though his eyes blazed with intensity that made her wolf howl with recognition. Take all the time you need. But as chaos erupted around them, pack members shouting questions, demanding explanations, Aveline felt something settle into place. Not just the offer itself, but what it represented. He wasn't just asking her to be his mate. He was asking her to stand beside him as an equal, to help lead a pack that had spent years grinding her under its heel. The scared Omega was truly dead. What remained was someone brave enough to reach for the impossible.
The moment he spoke Aveline's name, Corvin felt the pack's shock roll through the hall like a physical force. An Omega. Not just any Omega, but the broken girl who'd accused their former beta of systematic abuse. Revolutionary didn't begin to cover it. "You've lost your mind." The shout came from Marcus, his most trusted warrior. "An Omega Luna? The pack will never accept. The pack will accept what I decide." Corvin's voice cut through the protests like a blade. "Or they're free to challenge me for leadership." Silence fell. Challenging an alpha meant ritual combat to the death. Few were willing to risk that level of commitment to their objections, but he could feel the fractures spreading through his pack like cracks in ice. Those loyal to tradition, to the old ways where Omegas knew their place. Those who'd followed Rowan's poisonous influence, who saw Aveline as the architect of their beloved beta's downfall. Yet others nodded approval. The younger wolves, those who'd witnessed her courage firsthand. The Omegas and lower-ranked members who'd lived under Rowan's brutality. They understood what this meant. Revolution wrapped in the form of an impossibly brave woman. His gaze found Aveline across the chaos, watching emotions war across her delicate features. Shock, fear, wonder. The same recognition he'd felt the moment she'd walked into his hall with truth blazing in her golden eyes. This was right. Not politically expedient, not strategically sound, but fundamentally correct, in ways that went deeper than pack law or social convention. She'd awakened something in him that had been dormant for years, had forced him to feel again, to care beyond duty and discipline, had shown him what true strength looked like wrapped in apparent fragility. The pack was fracturing, but maybe that was necessary. Maybe they needed to burn down the old structures to build something better. With her beside him, he was willing to risk everything for that possibility, even if it meant war.
The knock came at midnight, soft, urgent, terrifying in its careful quiet. Aveline crept to her chamber door with heart hammering, every instinct screaming danger. "It's me!" The whispered voice belonged to Elena, a young Omega who'd vanished weeks ago. "Let me in. Quickly." What followed shattered everything Aveline thought she knew about the threats they faced. "I didn't run away," Elena whispered, her words tumbling over each other in desperate haste. "Rowan, he's been selling pack secrets to Silverclaw? Territory maps, patrol schedules, our weaknesses, in exchange for sanctuary when he takes over." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Bad enough that Rowan had abused his position, brutalized those under his protection. But treason? Selling out the entire pack to their enemies? There's more. Elena's voice dropped to barely audible. The attack the other night wasn't meant to kill you. It was a test run. They're planning something bigger. Much bigger. When? 3 days, during the new moon, when our night vision is weakest. A full assault on the fortress while most of our warriors are away on the autumn hunt. Ice flooded Aveline's veins. The autumn hunt, a sacred tradition that drew the pack's strongest fighters away for days at a time, leaving behind only the elders, the young, the vulnerable. And now she knew why Rowan had pushed so hard for traditional scheduling despite Corvin's security concerns. "Elena, you have to tell the Alpha—" "I can't." Terror bled through every word. "If Rowan finds out I escaped, that I talked, he has others, hostages, my little sister among them." The full scope of the conspiracy crashed over Aveline like a wave. This wasn't just about silencing her testimony or maintaining corrupt power structures. This was about destroying the pack entirely, handing their territory and people over to enemies in exchange for personal gain. "Help me," Elena whispered. "Help me save them." And in that moment, Aveline realized the scared Omega truly was gone forever. What remained was someone willing to walk into hell itself to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The war had found them whether they were ready or not.
The intelligence Aveline brought him in the pre-dawn darkness hit Corvin like a sledgehammer to the chest. Treason. Systematic betrayal stretching back months, maybe years. His own beta had sold them out, piece by piece, preparing the way for total destruction. "Are you certain?" But even as he asked, pieces were clicking into place. Rowan's insistence on traditional hunt scheduling, his access to patrol routes and security protocols, the way enemy packs always seemed to know exactly where to probe for weaknesses. Elena wouldn't lie about this. Aveline's voice carried absolute conviction. She risked everything to warn us. Us. The word hit him with unexpected force. She was thinking like a Luna already, taking responsibility for the pack's welfare as if it were her birthright instead of an impossible dream. The autumn hunt leaves tomorrow. His mind was already racing through contingencies, calculating odds that grew worse with every scenario. If I cancel it suddenly, Rowan will know we're onto him. But if I let our best warriors leave, we'll be defenseless when Silverclaw attacks. She finished the thought with grim understanding. Unless what? We spring the trap on them instead. Golden eyes blazed with fierce intelligence that took his breath away. Let them think they're catching us vulnerable, then show them exactly how wrong they are. The plan forming in his mind was audacious, dangerous, likely to get them all killed. It required trust, coordination, and the kind of desperate courage that separated true leaders from pretenders. But looking at Aveline, this impossible woman who'd walked out of shadows to save them all, Corvin felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The war was coming whether they were ready or not, but with her beside him, he was finally ready to fight it.
The emergency pack meeting at dawn felt like walking into a powder keg. Word of the planned betrayal had spread despite their best efforts at secrecy, and the great hall crackled with tension thick enough to taste. "Lies!" The shout came from Garrett, one of Rowan's most vocal supporters. "Desperate propaganda from an Omega who seeks to destroy our pack hierarchy." But Elena stood beside Aveline now, no longer hidden, no longer afraid. Her testimony corroborated every detail, every horrifying piece of the conspiracy that had nearly succeeded. "Show them," Corvin commanded quietly. Elena produced the correspondence she'd stolen during her escape. Letters in Rowan's handwriting, detailing patrol schedules, territory weaknesses, plans for the fortress assault. Evidence so damning that even his supporters fell silent. Yet silence wasn't acceptance. "Even if this is true," Marcus said carefully, "the timing is suspicious, convenient. How do we know this isn't orchestrated to justify your unprecedented choice in mate?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. That she'd manufactured this crisis to legitimize her elevation, to distract from the revolutionary nature of Corvin's declaration. Before Aveline could respond, something unexpected happened. Mira's mother rose from the Omega section, a broken woman who'd barely spoken since her daughter's disappearance. "My daughter tried to warn someone about Rowan months ago," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the hall. "She vanished the next day, found dead 2 weeks later, supposedly killed by rogues." Another Omega stood, then another. Stories poured forth, of missing pack members, of convenient accidents, of a systematic campaign of terror that had silenced opposition for years. The hall divided before their eyes. Those who'd benefited from Rowan's corrupt system, who'd turned blind eyes to suffering in exchange for personal advantage, and those who'd lived in fear, who'd lost friends and family to the conspiracy. "Choose." Corvin's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Stand with your pack or stand with our enemies, but choose now." Slowly, Surely, lines formed. Warriors stepping forward to pledge loyalty. Families gathering on one side or the other. The great fracturing that had been building for weeks finally erupting into open division. When the dust settled, roughly 2/3 remained loyal. Enough to mount a defense, but barely. As the dissenters filed out, some toward exile, others toward outright betrayal, Aveline felt the weight of what was coming settle on her shoulders. War. Real war, with real casualties and no guarantee of victory. But standing beside Corvin, watching him transform into the leader his pack truly needed, she felt ready for whatever came next.
Watching his pack split apart felt like watching his own heart tear in two. These were wolves he'd led for years, whose children he'd blessed, whose losses he'd mourned. Now they were walking away, some toward exile, others toward open treason, all because he'd chosen love over political expedience. "We're stronger without them," Aveline said quietly, though her voice carried notes of sadness that told him she understood the cost. A small pack united is worth more than a large one divided. Truth, but cold comfort when faced with the reality of what they'd lost. 2 of his best trackers, several experienced warriors, the head of his intelligence network. But what remained was solid, loyal, willing to fight and die for something better than the corrupt system they'd inherited. "The fortress won't hold against a full assault," Marcus reported grimly, "not with reduced numbers. Then we don't try to hold it." The plan had been forming in Corvin's mind since Elena's revelation, audacious and desperate in equal measure. "We let them think they've won, then hit them where they're not expecting it." As he outlined the strategy, he watched understanding dawn on faces around the room. Dangerous, likely to fail, requiring the kind of trust and coordination that came only from absolute unity. But possible, just barely possible. "This could work," one of the warriors said slowly, "if we time it perfectly, if everyone plays their part." If. The plan hung on a dozen variables, any one of which could doom them all. Yet looking at Aveline, this impossible woman who'd walked into his hall and changed everything, Corvin felt certainty settle in his bones. They would win. Not because victory was guaranteed, but because they had something worth fighting for. Each other. The future they were building together. The chance to create something better from the ashes of what had been. The war was coming, but they would be ready.
The War Council met in shadows, voices hushed as they finalized plans that would either save their pack or destroy it completely. Aveline studied the fortress layout spread across the table, memorizing every corridor, every weakness they'd exploit. "You understand the risks?" Corvin's question carried weight beyond tactical concerns. If their gambit failed, she'd be the primary target, the Omega who'd dared rise above her station. "I understand." Her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "But I also understand what happens if we do nothing." Genocide. Complete annihilation of everyone she'd come to love. The thought made her wolf snarl with protective fury. "The Silverclaw forces will expect minimal resistance," Marcus reported grimly. "Rowan's intelligence suggests most of our warriors departed for the hunt. They'll be overconfident." Good. Overconfidence bred mistakes. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Let the enemy believe they'd achieved surprise, then spring their own trap when Silverclaw forces were deepest inside the fortress. Risky beyond measure, but their only real chance. "Positions by midnight," Corvin commanded. "And remember, we get one shot at this." As the council dispersed, he caught her hand. "Aveline, I'm not backing down." The words came fierce, final. "These are my people now, too." The look in his eyes, pride mixed with terror at potentially losing her, made her chest tight with emotion. They'd found love in the midst of chaos, forged a bond stronger than pack law or social convention. Tonight would test whether it was strong enough to survive war.
Watching Aveline study battle plans with fierce concentration, Corvin felt his heart clench with equal parts pride and terror. She'd transformed from cowering victim to potential Luna, but the thought of her in danger made his wolf howl with protective fury. The Omega sections will be your primary targets, he told her quietly. If things go wrong, they won't. Her golden eyes blazed with absolute conviction. We won't let them. We. The simple word carried enormous weight. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for their future, for the pack that had finally accepted her as one of their own. The signal comes when Silverclaw reaches the Great Hall, Marcus confirmed. That's when they'll be most vulnerable, thinking they've won. Corvin nodded, though every instinct screamed against using her as bait. But she was right. This was their best chance, maybe their only chance. Whatever happens tonight, he said, pulling her aside as the others departed, know that you've already won. You've shown this pack what real courage looks like. She reached up to cup his face, thumb tracing across his cheekbone. We've won. Together. The kiss that followed tasted of desperate hope and unspoken promises. When they broke apart, something fundamental had shifted between them. Not just attraction or protection, but partnership forged in fire. Tonight would determine whether they had a future worth building. But standing here in the flickering candlelight, holding the woman who'd changed everything, Corvin felt ready for whatever came next. They'd face it together, and together, they were stronger than any enemy.
The attack came exactly as predicted. Swift, silent, devastating in its precision. Silverclaw warriors poured through the fortress like a dark tide, believing they faced minimal resistance from a pack caught unprepared. They were half right. Aveline crouched in the Omega quarters, listening to the thunder of footsteps overhead as enemy forces swept through the upper levels. Around her, the most vulnerable pack members waited in terrified silence, trusting her to keep them safe. The responsibility felt crushing and empowering in equal measure. They're in the Great Hall, Elena whispered from her position by the window. Signal? Not yet. They needed the enemy fully committed, believing victory was within reach. Only then would Corvin's counterattack have maximum impact. The sound of splintering wood echoed from above. Snarls. The clash of claws against stone. Then, silence. Rowan's voice carried through the sudden quiet, triumphant and mocking. Your precious Alpha is dead, you cowards! Come out and face your new masters! Lies. Had to be lies. But doubt crept in like poison, making her hands shake as she gripped the signal horn. Then she heard it. Corvin's howl. Wild and furious and very much alive, echoing from the hidden passages they'd prepared. The counterattack was beginning. Aveline raised the horn to her lips and blew. The note that emerged was pure, clear, defiant. A declaration that the pack's heart still beat, that their Luna stood ready to defend what was theirs. Around the fortress, loyal warriors emerged from concealment like wolves from winter shadows. The hunters had become the hunted.
The moment Aveline's signal pierced the night air, Corvin felt his heart soar with fierce pride. She'd held her position despite the terror, waited for the perfect moment to spring their trap. Now it was his turn. The Silverclaw forces in the Great Hall spun toward the sound, confusion rippling through their ranks. They'd expected cowering victims, not organized resistance. Surprise, Corvin growled, stepping from the hidden passage with his warriors flanking him like avenging angels. What followed was chaos. Beautiful, terrible, necessary chaos. Claws and fangs, snarls and screams, the ancient dance of survival played out on stones that had witnessed 1,000 such battles. But this was different. This was personal. When he found Rowan among the enemy fighters, Corvin felt something primal take hold. This was the wolf who'd terrorized his mate, who'd sold out their pack, who'd nearly destroyed everything worth protecting. You should have stayed dead, Rowan snarled, circling like the predator he'd always been. You should have stayed loyal. The fight was brief, savage, inevitable. Years of rage and betrayal poured out in claws and fangs, ending only when Rowan lay broken on the stones he'd desecrated with his treachery. But even as victory crystallized around them, Corvin's thoughts were already racing toward the Omega quarters. Toward her. The battle was won. Now came the harder task, building something better from the ashes of what they'd destroyed.
Dawn broke over a fortress painted in blood and littered with the fallen. Aveline moved through the aftermath like a ghost, checking on survivors, coordinating aid for the wounded, doing what needed to be done. 23 dead, 16 seriously injured. The pack that had seemed so large just yesterday felt devastatingly small in the morning light. But they'd won. Against impossible odds, they'd not only survived, but triumphed. The Silverclaw forces lay scattered, their invasion broken. Their alliance with Rowan ended in his death. "You did it," Elena whispered, exhaustion making her voice barely audible. "You saved us all." Had she? Looking around at the cost of their victory, Aveline wasn't sure salvation was the right word. They'd survived, yes, had proven themselves capable of defending what was theirs. But the price... Hey! Corvin's arms encircled her from behind, solid and warm and reassuring. "You're thinking too loud. So many lost." The words came out broken, heavy with guilt she couldn't quite shake. If I hadn't spoken up, if I'd just... then we'd all be dead or enslaved by now. His voice carried absolute conviction. "You saved this pack, Aveline. Not just last night, but months ago when you found the courage to speak truth to power." Maybe. But victory felt hollow when purchased with so much blood. "What happens now?" she asked, leaning back against his chest, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. "Now we rebuild." His lips brushed her temple, tender and protective. "We create something better from what remains. Together. Together." The word carried promise and possibility, hope for a future that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. As the sun climbed higher, painting the fortress in gold instead of crimson, Aveline felt something settle in her chest. Not peace. That would take time. But purpose. They'd survived the fire. Now came the harder task of rising from the ashes.
Holding Aveline as dawn broke over their battered fortress, Corvin felt the weight of leadership settle on his shoulders with new understanding. Victory had come, but at a cost that would shape everything they built going forward. "The Pack Council wants to meet this afternoon," Marcus reported quietly, "to discuss succession. Succession. Leadership. The future of wolves who'd just proven their loyalty with blood and sacrifice." "Tell them we'll meet at sunset," Corvin replied, "in the Great Hall." Where it all began, where a scared Omega had found courage to speak truth to power, setting in motion the events that had led them here. "Are you ready for this?" he asked Aveline softly. "Because the council would want answers, decisions, clarity about what came next." "No." Her honesty made him smile despite everything. "But I'll do it anyway." That was his Luna, terrified but brave, fragile but unbreakable, everything he'd never known he needed until she'd walked into his life and changed everything. The pack that gathered at sunset would be smaller, bloodied, forever changed by the events of recent days, but it would also be stronger, forged in fire, tested by betrayal, united by shared sacrifice. Together, they'd build something worth the price they'd paid, something worthy of those who'd fallen defending it. As the morning sun climbed higher, painting new possibilities across an ancient fortress, Corvin felt hope kindle in his chest. They'd survived the worst. Everything else was just details.
The Pack Council meeting 3 weeks after their victory should have been a celebration. Instead, it felt like watching everything they'd fought for crumble to ash. The Northern Territories refused to acknowledge her authority, Councilman Reed reported with barely concealed satisfaction. "They're calling for a proper Luna, one with bloodline credentials." Aveline sat beside Corvin's throne, trying to project confidence while whispers of dissent swirled around her like poison. The euphoria of surviving Rowan's betrayal had faded, replaced by harsh reality. An Omega Luna was revolutionary in theory. In practice, it was proving nearly impossible. 3 families have requested territory transfers, another councilman added. They claim they can't follow leadership that breaks with tradition so dramatically. Each word hit like a physical blow. These weren't enemies. These were pack members who'd fought beside them, who'd bled for their cause. Now they were abandoning ship because accepting her meant abandoning everything they'd been taught about hierarchy and worth. The Moonrise Pack has withdrawn their trade agreements, Reed continued relentlessly. They refuse to negotiate with what they term an illegitimate leadership structure. Isolation, political suicide, the slow strangulation of everything they'd tried to build. Enough. Corvin's voice carried lethal quiet that made the room fall silent. Anyone questioning Luna Aveline's authority is questioning mine. I suggest you remember that. But even his protection felt fragile now, threatened by forces beyond their control. She was destroying him through association, watching his carefully built alliances crumble because he'd chosen love over political expedience. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she really was too broken, too lowborn, too dangerous to stand beside an alpha.
Watching political reality tear apart everything they'd built felt like dying by inches. Each report of withdrawn support, each whispered doubt about Aveline's legitimacy, carved another piece from his heart. The pack's stability depends on conventional leadership structures. Reed pressed, his tone carefully respectful but poisonous in its implications. Perhaps a more traditional arrangement might restore confidence? Translation: abandon Aveline. Choose a proper Luna from among the neighboring Alpha's daughters. Sacrifice love for political survival. Over his dead body. My choice stands, he said flatly. Luna Aveline has proven herself in ways that bloodline alone never could. But even as he spoke the words, doubt crept in like winter cold. Was he destroying his pack through stubborn pride? Was his love for her worth the isolation, the economic pressure, the slow dissolution of everything his ancestors had built? The meeting ended with strained civility, but the damage was clear. They were losing ground daily, bleeding support to an enemy more insidious than Rowan's outright betrayal, social convention wrapped in political necessity. Later, alone in their chambers, he found Aveline staring out the window with shoulders that carried the weight of the world. "They're right," she said quietly. "I'm destroying everything you've worked for. You're the only thing that makes any of this worth working for." But even his conviction felt hollow against the mounting evidence. Love might conquer all in fairy tales. In reality, it was proving insufficient against the brutal mathematics of political survival. They were losing, and he was running out of moves to play.
The message arrived at dawn, carried by a Silverclaw messenger who looked smugly satisfied to deliver what amounted to a death sentence. Alliance of 5 packs demands immediate compliance, Aveline read aloud, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her veins. Remove the illegitimate Omega from leadership position or face complete territorial isolation and economic embargo. 5 packs. Nearly half the regional alliance. United against her existence, her presumption, her audacity to rise above the station fate had assigned her. "They're giving us 7 days, she continued, each word tasting like ash, to choose between proper leadership and total ostracization. Corvin stood frozen beside his desk, the careful mask of alpha authority finally cracking to reveal the devastation beneath. This wasn't just political pressure anymore. This was systematic annihilation, disguised as diplomacy. "We've faced worse," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. They both knew the truth. Military attacks could be repelled. Political isolation was slower, more thorough, ultimately more deadly. "Have we?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, because it feels like we're drowning in slow motion. Their pack was already fragmenting. Food shipments had stopped arriving. Trade routes were being redirected. The fortress that had seemed so strong just weeks ago now felt like a prison, beautiful and doomed. "I won't abandon you." His words carried desperate intensity. "Whatever they demand, whatever they threaten, even if it destroys everything else?" She turned to face him fully, seeing her own heartbreak reflected in his steel-gray eyes. Even if it means watching your pack starve? Your people suffer? He reached for her, but she stepped back. The space between them felt like an ocean, impossible to cross without drowning them both. 7 days to choose between love and survival. 7 days to decide which was more important, her heart or his pack's future. The cruel mathematics of leadership were becoming impossible to ignore.
The ultimatum lay on his desk like a coiled serpent, each word carefully chosen to maximize devastation, complete isolation, economic ruin. The slow strangulation of everything he'd inherited from generations of ancestors, all because he'd chosen to love an Omega. There has to be another way, he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were lies. The Alliance of Five had played their hand perfectly. Not open warfare that might unite his pack in defiance, but slow economic pressure that would strangle them gradually. Is there? Aveline's voice carried exhaustion that went bone deep. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like they've cornered us completely. She was right. Damn her, she was right. The political realities were inescapable, and Omega Luna represented such a fundamental challenge to established order that other packs would unite to destroy the precedent before it could spread. I could fight them, he said desperately. Challenge their authority, force them to what? Declare war on half the region? Her laugh held no humor. You'd be fighting everyone, Corvin. Your own people would suffer for your pride. Your pride. As if this was about ego rather than love, politics rather than principle. But maybe she was right about that too. Maybe his stubborn refusal to bend was condemning innocent wolves to starvation and isolation. Maybe loving her was the most selfish thing he'd ever done. 7 days, she said quietly. That's generous, considering what we're asking them to accept. 7 days to find a miracle. 7 days to discover some solution that would save both his pack and his heart. 7 days to accept that sometimes love wasn't enough. As he watched her walk away, shoulders straight despite the burden she carried, Corvin felt something crack inside his chest. Not his heart. That was already broken. Something deeper. His faith that they could overcome anything together.
The decision crystallized in the pre-dawn darkness of their 4th day, when even breathing felt like betrayal. Aveline stood at the window of their shared chambers, watching the fortress grounds where her pack, their pack, went about their daily routines with increasingly hollow efficiency. Rationing had begun yesterday. The last trade caravan had turned away at their borders, carrying medicine they desperately needed. 2 more families had requested territory transfers, unwilling to sacrifice their children's futures for an impossible dream. She was poison, beautiful, seductive poison that was killing everything it touched. You're thinking too loud, Corvin's voice came from behind her, rough with sleep and worry that never left him anymore. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in weeks. The words came out steady, final. This has to end. Aveline. No. She turned to face him, memorizing every detail of his face in the gray morning light. Look around us, Corvin. Really look. We're dying by inches, and everyone we care about is dying with us. He crossed the room in 3 strides, hands framing her face with desperate gentleness. We'll find another way. There's always another way. Is there? She leaned into his touch, despite knowing it would make leaving harder. Because all I see is a pack slowly starving because their alpha chose love over duty. Love is duty. His voice cracked on the words. Protecting you, standing by you, that's the most important duty I have. What about protecting them? She gestured toward the window, toward the wolves whose loyalty was costing them everything. What about your duty to ensure they survive and thrive? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. They both knew the answer, had known it since the ultimatum arrived, maybe even before. I'm leaving, she whispered, tonight, before you have to choose between me and everything else. Like hell you are. You can't stop me." The words tasted like death. "And deep down, you know I'm right." His eyes blazed with fury and heartbreak in equal measure. "You think I'll just let you walk away? That I'll survive losing you? You'll survive because you have to, because your pack needs you to."
The words hit Corvin like physical blows, each one designed to shatter what remained of his resolve. She was leaving, choosing exile over the slow destruction of everything he'd built. "You don't get to make this choice alone," he snarled, his wolf raging against the inevitable. "We're mates, partners, equals." "Are we?" Her smile held infinite sadness. "Because it doesn't feel equal when my presence destroys your life's work." She was right. God damn her, she was right about everything. The pack was suffering, isolation was tightening like a noose, and every day they held on to their impossible dream was another day his people paid the price for his selfishness. But losing her would kill him, not metaphorically, literally. The bond between them had grown too deep, too fundamental. Ripping it apart would leave wounds that never healed. "There has to be another way," he repeated desperately, though the words rang hollow even to his own ears. "Sometimes love means letting go." Her hand touched his cheek with heartbreaking tenderness. "Sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away." "Don't." The word came out broken. "Don't do this to us. I'm doing this for us, for you, for the pack that needs its alpha to choose survival over sentiment." He could stop her. Lock her in these chambers, post guards, use his alpha authority to override her decision. But doing so would make him no better than Rowan, a man who took choice away from those he claimed to protect. "I love you," he said instead, the words carrying all the anguish of inevitable loss. "I know." Her smile was radiant, despite the tears streaming down her face. "That's why this will work, because you love me enough to let me save you." As dawn broke over the fortress, Corvin felt his world ending not in violence or betrayal, but in the quiet devastation of noble sacrifice. Sometimes the cruelest enemy was love itself.
The knock came just as Aveline finished packing her meager belongings, each item a memory she'd have to leave behind. She expected Corvin, come to make one final plea. Instead, Elena slipped through the door with desperate urgency. "You can't leave," she whispered. "Not yet." "Elena, we've discussed this." "No, you don't understand." The young Omega's eyes blazed with fierce determination. "We won't let you sacrifice yourself for their prejudice." "We?" The door opened wider, revealing a delegation that stole Aveline's breath. Marcus, Corvin's most trusted warrior. Sarah from the kitchens. Even old Henrik, the pack's eldest member. Omega, Beta, warrior, united in purpose that transcended traditional hierarchy. "We've been talking," Marcus said quietly. "All of us. And we've reached a decision." "You don't speak for us," Henrik added, his weathered face grave but determined. "You never asked if we wanted you to leave. Never gave us the chance to fight for what we believe in." "The Alliance of Five threatens us because they're afraid," Sarah continued. "Afraid of change, afraid of what we represent. But fear makes them weak, not strong." "We have 3 days left," Elena said. 3 days to show them that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost." Aveline felt something crack inside her chest. Not breaking, but opening. Hope, fragile and dangerous, unfurling like spring flowers after winter. "What are you suggesting?" "That we stop running," Marcus replied, "and start showing the world what real strength looks like." The scared Omega who'd cowered in shadows was truly gone. What remained was someone worth fighting for and someone willing to fight back.
Finding his chambers empty should have devastated him. Instead, following voices to the great hall, Corvin discovered something that made his heart soar with impossible hope. His pack, what remained of it, had gathered in defiance of political pressure and social convention. Not ordered by alpha authority or coerced by hierarchy, but united by choice. By love for the woman who'd changed everything. "Alpha," Marcus said, his voice carrying new respect. "We need to talk." What followed was revolution disguised as pack meeting. They'd reached out to allies he'd forgotten he had, young alphas tired of ancient prejudices, progressive leaders willing to challenge convention, omegas from other packs who saw Aveline as hope incarnate. "The Redwood Pack wants to meet," Elena reported with barely contained excitement. "Their alpha has an omega daughter. She's been watching our situation with great interest." Moonwillow Territory sent this. Sarah produced a letter bearing elegant script. "Their Luna supports what we're trying to build. Not enough to overcome the alliance of 5, but enough to show they weren't completely alone. Enough to suggest that change was possible if they had courage to see it through." 3 days, he said, looking around at faces that had chosen hope over fear. "We have 3 days to prove that love makes us stronger, not weaker." "Where's Aveline?" Marcus asked. "Packing." The word tasted bitter. "She thinks leaving will save us." "Then we'd better convince her she's wrong," Henrik said with a grin that took decades off his weathered features. "Because this pack needs its Luna." For the first time in days, Corvin felt something other than despair. Not certainty. The odds were still impossible. But possibility. Sometimes that was enough.
The war council that assembled at sunset was unlike anything the fortress had ever seen. Traditional hierarchy abandoned in favor of brutal practicality, with voices that mattered most given equal weight regardless of rank. "Redwood Pack confirmed," Marcus reported, his tone carrying cautious optimism. "Alpha Cain will arrive tomorrow with a delegation. His Omega daughter specifically requested to meet Luna Aveline." Luna Aveline. The title still felt surreal, impossible, dangerous. But hearing it spoken with respect instead of mockery made something warm unfurl in her chest. "Moonwillow Territory sent supplies," Sarah added. "And a message of support. They're tired of the old ways, too." Not enough to tip the balance, but enough to show they weren't completely isolated. Other packs were watching, waiting to see if change was possible, or if tradition would crush this rebellion like all the others. "The Alliance of 5 is mobilizing," Elena warned quietly. "Not for war, but for politics. They plan to present unified opposition tomorrow, demanding our immediate surrender or face complete ostracization." "Let them come," Corvin said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet confidence that made wolves follow him into hell itself. "We'll show them what real unity looks like." Aveline studied the faces around the table. Scarred warriors and gentle healers, proud betas and determined omegas, united not by blood or tradition, but by choice, by love for something better than what they'd inherited. "You realize this could destroy us?" she asked quietly. "If we fail, there's no going back, no forgiveness." "If we don't try," Henrik replied with ancient wisdom, "we've already failed. Some things are worth risking everything for." "Are you ready for this?" Corvin asked, his steel-gray eyes holding hers across the table. Was she? Ready to stand before the most powerful alphas in the region and defend her right to exist as an equal? Ready to risk everything on the impossible dream that love could triumph over prejudice? "Yes." The word came out steady. "Sure. I'm ready."
Watching Aveline transform from frightened exile back into the fierce Luna she was meant to be felt like watching the sun rise after endless winter. This was the woman who'd walked into his hall with truth blazing in her golden eyes. This was the mate he'd choose again and again, regardless of consequence. "Tomorrow decides everything," he said, studying faces that had chosen hope over safety. "Win or lose, we face it together." "We'll win," Elena said with quiet certainty. "Because we have to." The simple faith in her voice humbled him. They'd all sacrificed for this impossible dream. Security, comfort, the easy path of tradition. Now it was time to discover if their faith had been misplaced. "The Alliance will expect us to grovel," Marcus observed, "to beg forgiveness and promise compliance. Then they'll be disappointed." Aveline's voice carried steel wrapped in silk. I'm done apologizing for existing. That was his Luna, terrified but unbreakable, fragile but fierce. Everything he'd never known he needed until she'd changed his world completely. Get some rest, he commanded as the council dispersed. Tomorrow we make history. Later, alone in their chambers, he found Aveline staring out at stars that seemed brighter than they had in weeks. Having second thoughts? He asked, pulling her against his chest. No. She leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. For the first time in days, I'm thinking clearly. We're going to win this. How can you be sure? Because we have something they don't. She turned in his arms, eyes blazing with absolute conviction. We have love that makes us stronger instead of weaker. Truth that doesn't bend to convenience. Hope that survives even when everything seems lost. Tomorrow would bring the greatest test of their lives. But holding her close, feeling her heart beat against his ribs, Corvin knew she was right. They were going to win.
The Great Hall had been transformed into an arena where the future of their kind would be decided. Representatives from 8 packs filled every available space, their combined presence creating pressure thick enough to cut. At the head table sat the Alliance of 5, powerful alphas whose word could condemn or absolve with equal ease. Aveline stood beside Corvin's throne, no longer hiding in shadows, but claiming her place in the light. The Omega Luna who'd dared rise above her station, ready to defend that rise before wolves who'd rather see her destroyed. This assembly will come to order, Alpha Cain of Redwood announced, his voice carrying ancient authority. We gather to address the unprecedented situation in Bloodfang territory. Unprecedented. As if love and justice were anomalies to be corrected rather than truths to be celebrated. Alpha Corvin, the lead Alliance representative, spoke with barely concealed disdain. You have defied convention, ignored tradition, and chosen personal desire over pack stability. Explain yourself. The moment of truth had arrived. Everything they'd fought for, everything they'd sacrificed, everything they'd built, all of it balanced on this single conversation. Corvin rose slowly, commanding attention through presence alone, but instead of speaking, he held out his hand to her. My Luna will speak for herself, he said simply. The gasps that rippled through the hall were audible. An Alpha stepping aside for an Omega, unprecedented, didn't begin to cover it. Aveline took his offered hand, drawing strength from the contact, and stepped forward to address the most powerful gathering of wolves she'd ever seen. I stand before you not as an Omega begging for acceptance, she began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner, but as a Luna who has earned her place through courage, sacrifice, and love. The words that followed would either damn them or save them. Everything hung on her ability to convince tradition-bound alphas that change was not only possible but necessary. The future was balanced on a knife's edge, and she was the only one who could tip it toward hope.
Watching Aveline face down the most powerful wolves in the region with nothing but truth and courage made Corvin's chest swell with pride, so fierce it stole his breath. This was why he'd fallen in love with her, not her beauty or vulnerability, but her unbreakable spirit wrapped in apparent fragility. You speak of earning your place, Alpha Reed challenged, his voice dripping contempt. But what has an Omega ever done to earn the right to lead? Wrong question, dangerously wrong question. I survived systematic abuse for years while your precious hierarchy looked the other way, Aveline replied, steel entering her tone. I found courage to speak truth when it could have cost me my life. I've helped lead this pack through betrayal and war, standing beside my Alpha as an equal partner. Pretty words, another Alliance member scoffed. But leadership requires more than survival instincts. Does it? She stepped forward, golden eyes blazing with controlled fury. Because from where I stand, leadership requires exactly what I've shown, the courage to do what's right regardless of personal cost, the strength to protect those who can't protect themselves, the wisdom to see beyond convention to what's truly necessary. Murmurs rippled through the hall, not all dismissive, some thoughtful, considering, weighing her words against everything they'd been taught about hierarchy and worth. "You ask what an Omega has done to earn leadership?" Aveline continued, her voice rising with passionate conviction. "I've proven that strength comes in many forms, that courage isn't measured by rank, that love, real love, makes us stronger, not weaker." She was magnificent, terrifying and beautiful, and absolutely unstoppable in her defense of everything they'd built together. The Alliance would vote soon, would decide their fate based on politics and prejudice and ancient fears. But watching Aveline command that room with nothing but truth and determination, Corvin knew they'd already won the only battle that truly mattered. They'd proven that change was possible, that love could triumph over convention, that sometimes the greatest strength came from the most unexpected sources.
The silence that followed her speech stretched like a held breath, every wolf in the great hall suspended between past and future. Then Alpha Cain of Redwood rose slowly, his weathered face unreadable. "The Alliance of Five demands your immediate abdication," he announced, his voice carrying ancient authority. "They offer exile in exchange for your peaceful departure." Exile, not death, but something close, banishment from everything that gave life meaning. Aveline felt the pack's collective intake of breath, felt Corvin's hand tighten on hers. "And what does Redwood Pack say?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Cain's lips quirked in what might have been approval. "Redwood Pack recognizes Luna Aveline as legitimate leader, earned through trial by fire." He turned to address the assembly. "We propose a new alliance, one based on merit rather than bloodline, strength rather than tradition." The hall erupted, shouts of outrage from traditional packs, cheers of support from progressive voices. Through the chaos, Aveline watched other leaders weighing their options, calculating political costs. "Moonwillow Territory seconds the motion," called Alpha Sarah, her voice cutting through the noise. "Stormwind Pack agrees," added another voice. One by one, the votes were cast. Not unanimous, change never was, but enough, barely enough to tip the balance toward hope instead of fear. When the final tally was announced, 5 packs in support of the new alliance, 4 maintaining traditional opposition, Aveline felt something fundamental shift in the world. They'd won. Not completely, not without cost, but definitively. The impossible had become inevitable. "Long live Luna Aveline," Cain declared, and the words were taken up by voices throughout the hall. She'd found her voice at last, and the world had listened.
Watching political reality reshape itself around Aveline's courage felt like witnessing the birth of a new world. 5 packs willing to abandon centuries of tradition for the promise of something better. 5 packs choosing progress over prejudice. It wasn't unanimous victory. The Alliance of 5 maintained their opposition, choosing isolation over adaptation. But it was enough. More than enough. The new Progressive Alliance recognizes equal leadership regardless of birth rank, Alpha Cain continued, his words carving new law from old stone. Merit, courage, and wisdom shall determine worth, not bloodline or arbitrary hierarchy. Revolution, wrapped in political language, but revolution nonetheless. Everything they'd fought for, died for, sacrificed for, finally crystallizing into reality. Corvin rose from his throne, but instead of addressing the assembly, he turned to Aveline, the woman who'd walked into his hall with truth blazing in her golden eyes. The mate who'd transformed him from cold ruler to leader worth following. "My Luna," he said, his voice carrying love and pride in equal measure. "Your people await your address." Your people. Not his pack that she'd joined, but hers by right of earning, by right of sacrifice, by right of courage that had changed everything. She stepped forward, no longer the scared Omega who'd scrubbed blood from stone floors. This was Luna Aveline, forged in fire, tested by betrayal, proven through trial, beautiful and terrible and absolutely magnificent. We stand at the beginning of something new, she told the assembled wolves, her voice reaching every corner of the hall. Not the ending of tradition, but its evolution. Not the destruction of hierarchy, but its transformation into something worthy of the wolves it serves. As applause thundered through the ancient stones, Corvin felt complete for the first time in years. They'd won more than political recognition. They'd won the right to love without apology, to lead without compromise, to build something better from the ashes of what had been. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility.
3 months after the Great Assembly, the fortress buzzed with activity that would have been unimaginable under the old regime. Omega children attended the same training sessions as their higher-ranked peers. Former enemies worked alongside loyal pack members to rebuild what war had damaged. Change, slow but inexorable, flowing through every aspect of their daily lives. Aveline stood in the Great Hall, her hall now as much as Corvin's, reviewing reports from across the Progressive Alliance territories, trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, cultural exchanges that would have been forbidden under traditional hierarchy. The Healers Academy is requesting additional funding, Marcus reported, his tone carrying none of the skepticism that had once colored his interactions with her. They want to expand Omega enrollment by 30%. Approved. The word came easily now, backed by authority she'd earned rather than inherited. What about the Stormwind delegation? Arriving tomorrow. Their Alpha's daughter wants to observe our integration protocols. Marcus smiled, an expression that had become common since their victory. Seems our reputation is spreading. Our reputation. Not just hers or Corvin's, but theirs collectively. Proof that change was possible when courage met opportunity. Any word from the traditional alliance? She asked, though she dreaded the answer. Still maintaining isolation, but... Marcus hesitated. Intelligence suggests some of their younger members are growing restless. Change is harder to stop once it starts spreading. True. Revolution was like wildfire, contained for a time, but always seeking new fuel, new territory to transform. A commotion at the hall's entrance drew her attention. Corvin strode through the massive doors, but he wasn't alone. Behind him walked Elena, no longer the frightened Omega who'd brought warning of invasion, but wearing the formal robes of an Alliance ambassador. Luna, Elena said with a grin that lit up her entire face. I bring greetings from the Redwood Pack, and an invitation. An invitation? To the first Inter-Alliance Summit. 6 packs, 6 different approaches to progressive leadership. They want to learn from us. Learn from them. The scared Omega and the cold Alpha who'd found love in the midst of chaos, who'd chosen each other over convention, who'd proven that strength came in forms tradition had never imagined.
Watching Aveline review diplomatic correspondence with the same fierce attention she'd once given to scrubbing floors filled Corvin with pride that never seemed to fade. She'd grown into her role as Luna, not by changing who she was, but by finally being allowed to show who she'd always been. The Inter-Alliance Summit, he said, moving to stand beside her desk. Alpha Kane specifically requested that you keynote the opening ceremony. Me? Surprise flickered across her features, not the self-doubt of earlier months, but simple amazement at how far they'd traveled from those dark days when exile had seemed their only option. You, he confirmed, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips. The Luna who started a revolution. We started it, she corrected gently. Together. Together. The word that had defined their journey from the moment she'd found courage to speak truth to power. They'd faced betrayal, war, political isolation, and social condemnation. Had survived it all by refusing to face it alone. The summit could change everything, Elena added, her diplomatic training showing in the careful way she chose her words. If 6 packs can prove the Progressive Alliance works, others will follow. If we fail, we won't, Aveline said with quiet certainty. Because we're not fighting for political advantage or territorial gain. We're fighting for the radical idea that every wolf deserves to reach their full potential, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. Such simple words, such revolutionary implications. As evening settled over the fortress, Corvin found himself standing where it all began, in the great hall where a scared Omega had once knelt to scrub blood from ancient stones. Now those same stones reflected torchlight off surfaces polished by hope instead of fear. "No regrets?" he asked Aveline as they made their way to chambers that had become a sanctuary of love and partnership. "Only one," she replied, surprising him, that it took so long for someone to find the courage to try. But they had tried. Had risked everything for love and justice and the impossible dream that things could be better. And they'd won.
1 year later, Aveline stood before the largest gathering of wolves in recorded history. The Great Assembly had grown from desperate political necessity into annual celebration. 6 allied packs becoming 12, then 20, then too many to count as the revolution spread like wildfire across ancient territories. "When I first walked into Bloodfang's Great Hall," she began, her voice carrying to wolves who'd traveled from distant lands to witness this testament to change, "I was broken, afraid, convinced that my only value lay in silent service and invisible suffering." The sea of faces before her held every rank, every age, every background imaginable. Omega children sitting beside Alpha elders. Former enemies sharing space with blood relatives. Unity forged from diversity. Strength drawn from inclusion. I believed my scars marked me as damaged goods, evidence of weakness, proof of unworthiness. She touched the faded marks on her throat, no longer hidden but displayed with pride. I was wrong. Her hand found Corvin's across the small space between their thrones, equal seats for equal partners, carved from stone that had once known only hierarchy and fear. "Scars are not evidence of weakness," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "They are proof of survival, evidence of battles fought and won, armor earned through courage rather than inherited through bloodline." The applause that followed was thunderous, but she wasn't finished. Not yet. "We stand here today not because change was easy, but because it was necessary. Not because tradition was wrong, but because it was incomplete. Every wolf deserves the chance to discover their true strength, regardless of rank or birth or the circumstances that shaped their early lives." As she spoke, Aveline caught sight of faces in the crowd that told their own stories of transformation. Elena, now serving as Alliance Coordinator. Marcus, leading integrated training programs. Young Omegas wearing warriors' braids alongside Alphas who'd learned that strength came in many forms. "The revolution we began in shadows has become evolution in daylight," she concluded. "Proof that love, real love, doesn't make us weak. It makes us unstoppable." When the ceremony ended hours later, when the last diplomatic formalities had been completed and the vast assembly had dispersed to their distant homes, Aveline found herself alone with Corvin in the garden, where he'd first taught her to fight.
"Any regrets now?" he asked, echoing the question from their early days as mates. So much had changed since then, their pack, their world, themselves. But some things remained constant. About falling in love with a stubborn alpha who thought he knew better than everyone else? Aveline's smile held warmth that could melt winter itself. Never. They'd built something impossible together, a love story that had become a revolution, a personal journey that had transformed an entire world. Not perfect, not complete, but undeniably real. "The Council of Alphas wants to formalize the alliance structure," he reported, though politics felt insignificant compared to the simple miracle of holding her in his arms. 27 packs ready to sign the progressive charter. 27. Wonder colored her voice. "Sometimes I can barely believe how far we've come. From Omega and Alpha to Luna and her devoted mate," he murmured against her hair. "From enemies to allies, from broken hierarchy to chosen family. From scars to armor," she added softly. "From scars to armor, the perfect summary of their impossible journey." As the moon rose over the fortress that had become the beating heart of a new world, Corvin held his mate close and marveled at the truth they'd discovered together. That sometimes the greatest strength came from the most unexpected sources. that love could indeed conquer all when backed by courage, and that the voices most worth hearing often belonged to those the world had tried hardest to silence. They'd found their voices at last, and the world would never be the same.
The cry that split the pre-dawn air was strong, healthy, absolutely perfect. Aveline held her newborn daughter against her chest, marveling at tiny fingers that already showed signs of the strength that would define her life. "She's beautiful," Corvin whispered, his voice rough with emotion as he traced one finger along their daughter's downy cheek. "What should we call her?" Aveline looked down at the small face that held infinite possibility, at the child who would grow up in a world where Omega daughters could dream of anything, where love determined worth more than bloodline. "Hope," she said softly. "Her name is Hope." Outside their window, the fortress that had once known only shadows and fear basked in golden sunlight, alive with the voices of wolves who'd learned that strength came in many forms, that courage could transform even the darkest circumstances, and that sometimes the greatest revolutions began with a single voice brave enough to speak truth to power. The Omega who'd once scrubbed blood from stone floors had become Luna of a new age. Her scars had indeed become armor, and that armor would protect not just herself, but every wolf brave enough to dream of something better. The future stretched before them, bright with infinite possibility.